Hello and welcome to Ward Talk, CTN's look at the political scene in Ann Arbor. I'm your host, Bonnie Gabowitz. We'll be discussing issues and solutions with the City Council members from our 5 wards on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Joining us is Jack Eaton from Ward 4. Welcome, Jack.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you haven't been here in quite a while, but I would like to comment that you've been on the board, the council, for, this is your 5th year.
Yes.
So you've seen a lot happening. And this being the month of September, we just had recently an election. So I was interested in what you had to say about not only the election itself, but how you look at the coming year or two in terms of, you know, what the makeup of the council is and what the goals are.
Well, in August on the primary, all 5 council races were contested, and there was a good, vigorous debate of issues. I ran for mayor. I did not win the primary election, but I retained my seat on council, so I will continue to serve to 2020. And a number of changes were made through the primary process. So in the 2nd ward, my close friend Kathy Griswold prevailed, and she will be uncontested in November. In the 4th ward, Elizabeth Nelson won that primary, but she's facing an independent candidate in November. And in the 1st ward, Sumi Kailasapathy decided not to run for re-election this year, and so there was a contested race there, and Jeff Hayner won the Democratic Party nomination, but he'll be facing an independent as well. So we still have 2 races that will happen in November, but
So how many actually are not being contested for the November election?
So the mayor's uncontested, and 3 of the 5 council races are uncontested in the November election.
So there's still, we have to wait till November to have the final makeup of the council.
Typically, the Democratic nominee prevails in the November election. You know, perhaps Jane Lum is the notable exception to that rule, but she's a notable exception to a variety of rules. So she's just an exceptional person, and so she prevails because of who she is, not party affiliation.
So do you see the goals any different in the fall and into the winter in terms of what the council's trying to do?
Well, yes. Primarily, in the recent past, the mayor has had a comfortable majority on council, and so I don't know that we've really had the full discussion and debate of issues that we might have with more independent-minded people, and I would say that the people that I anticipate joining me on council have those independent views, and so we're going to have a more vigorous discussion of issues. Things won't come to council already predetermined, but rather there'll be an exchange of ideas. I think there'll be considerably more compromise and give and take, and I look forward to that because that's really what a healthy democracy looks like.
Mm-hmm. Great. And in terms of, I just want to hit upon one thing. How many independent council members are there now? I know Jane is an independent.
Jane is the only independent. Everyone else on council, including the mayor, is a Democrat.
And would you say it's more of a challenge for an independent to be voted in to a council? Is there an advantage to having the political label of being a Democrat or a Republican rather than an independent?
Yes, especially in even-numbered years. A lot of voters show up and just vote straight party Democrat. The courts have ruled that you actually have to mark every candidate in this November election. But there is a state initiative on the ballot this year that would restore the straight party voting. And so it's particularly difficult for a non-Democrat to be elected in Ann Arbor in an even-numbered year.
So would you like to see more independents being encouraged to run and be involved in leadership?
I would actually prefer that we go to nonpartisan elections.
Right, and just do away with the labels,
Yeah.
the political labels.
People are still going to look at what your background is, who you're affiliated with, and things like that. But it won't be just an automatic, uninformed, because you have a D next to your name, you prevail. And it would give people who really have a lot of connection to the community, like Jane Lum, an opportunity to run and prevail, because people would actually have to think through it. So I think that that's one of the things that we'll tackle in this next year is try to accomplish going to nonpartisan.
Well, what has to happen in order to change it? Is that something the council does, or does it go beyond to a state level as to whether you can change that?
We would have to change the city charter. And to change the city charter, either you have to circulate petitions to get it on the ballot, or just by a simple majority vote of council, we can vote to put it on the ballot. But then the voters will have the ultimate decision to make. And we can amend our city charter in any regular state or city election, which are now all in even numbered years, or by calling a special election. So if something comes up this year that will be on a ballot, in the odd numbered year, 2019 elections, I would propose adding that to the same ballot, so that I'm not in favor of holding a special election just for that issue alone, but typically something comes up, a millage or something. And so if we're going to vote for anything, then I would try to add that to the ballot as well.
Great. Now you're representing Ward 4,
Yes.
which is a neighborhood I used to live in. So and it's got a lot going on. So let's just talk about Ward 4 in particular. And I know that there was an apartment that was approved.
I think you're speaking of the 151
around
Hoover?
Yeah, Hoover, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a whole...
That's a whole block,
a
isn't
whole
it?
residential block. Couple blocks from the Michigan Stadium, football stadium. And the developer came in and offered to buy all the remaining houses on that block and the other properties. There's one commercial property. And proposed a development that will occupy the entire block. It'll be a 3 or 4 story apartment complex with parking under the apartments. And it'll have a little bit of commercial, right at the corner of Hoover and Green. And it's kind of a different sort of development for a historically residential.
And how high will this building be? Or?
I knew, and I believe it's 3 or 4 stories.
Okay, but not incredibly
It's not a
tall.
high rise,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
by any means. But and they're going to be nice, but they're going to be market rate, and market rate in Ann Arbor is kind of pricey.
Have they offered any affordable housing within that building?
I don't believe they did. This is just within the zoning that was granted for the property, which is R4C, which is just a multi-unit residential zoning district. And so there's no requirement that they offer affordable housing.
And also there's some flood plans going on in the Lawton neighborhood.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, we hired a consultant and we engaged the community because we had significant flooding problems in the Lawton neighborhoods. If we got an extreme rain event, streets would turn into rivers. It's remarkable. There have been YouTube videos of the flooding in that neighborhood and just a number of problems. And so they developed plans to try to mitigate the flooding problems. And one of the components of that plan was to put a drain field near I-94 and Maple Road. Another component was to install an underground drainage tank behind the school, in the park behind the school, the Lawton School. And then the third component was to put another detention pond On the school property, on just adjacent to Scioto Church Road, north of 7th Street there. And over time, all three of these components have just kind of been abandoned. So the one that looked like it was going to move forward, the one close to I-94, it just turned out that it was kind of impossible to do it without having real impact on utilities and the environment and things like that.
Well, when these were proposed, was there a study done ahead of time so that they would know it would be successful or there would be problems?
Well, the study just identified potential projects like this. There was the issue of how we would fund it, especially the underground tank is wildly expensive. But the two surface detention ponds are basically just excavation, and it wasn't until they actually got out there and started to dig that they realized the difficulties they were going to have. So the detention pond closest to the highway, I've been told, will be instead replaced with a detention pond on the other side of the highway. And if you just understand the flow of water in Mallett's Creek, that's where a lot of the problem comes from. It heads from the township towards the river, and I believe the county Water Resources Commissioner, I had to think of his title, believes that that's a viable alternative, and so he's exploring that now, as far as I know. I don't know why we're not going forward with the detention pond on the school property, whether we ran into difficulties working with the school district or whether there's some other obstacle there. But this building season, they've been working on Scioto Church Road, and they didn't do any of the sewers or water mains under the road, and they didn't do the detention pond, and I think it was just a lack of funding.
Okay. Well, we're going to be taking a break right now, and then we'll continue with what else has been going on in the city.
All right.
Okay? We're taking a break now, so we want to hear from you. Email questions to ctn@a2gov.org or tweet us at #CTN in Arbor. We're taking a break, and we'll be coming back with more from Ward 4. Hi, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz, and this is Ward Talk. I'm speaking with Ward 4 council member named Jack Eaton. Jack, we were just having a very interesting talk about the problems with Ward 4 and the flood plans, and this is just an example. I want to comment on that. There are certain problems the city has that are ongoing that constantly have to be looked at. New problems might come up, old problems might come up, but the city's always trying to deal with it, and there's really no ending.
Well, and especially because with climate change, weather events are becoming more and more extreme. And so even if our floodplain was well maintained, we would have to make changes because it's getting flooding problems are getting worse over time, and so
And let's just hope that we have some modern ways of solving these problems, that maybe technology will help us with some things. So we'll always be touching upon that. Something new just came up recently where the way the citizens are being charged the water rates. I wanted to mention that because there seems to be some confusion as to there are certain tier levels of usage, and certain built types of buildings have different rates than others. Could you clarify that, please?
Yeah. So last year we hired a consultant to study our cost of service, because your water rates are a fee, not a tax, and so the fee actually has to represent what it costs to provide you water.
And in terms of, it's not just the water, but the treatment of water as well. It's
the capacity to supply enough clean, safe water. Mm-hmm. So yes, especially the treatment plant. Mm-hmm. And they embarked on a rate-setting process that used different criteria than we've used in the past. We've always had tiers of charges. So if you use a minimal amount, you're charged less per gallon than if you use more. And those tiers just were slight increments more expensive.
And do you know how many tiers there were?
There were 3. Mm. But with the introduction of this new, more controversial one, there's 3 tiers like there were before. But then there's a 4th tier that is extremely more expensive than the first 3 tiers. And you only pay that higher price for water in excess of your consumption at the 3rd tier rate. But it can have a big impact. So the first tier is $3 per cubic centimeter. And the 4th tier is $14 per CCF. And that's a dramatic increase in price. And that's going to have an impact on large families and people who garden, or people who water their tree or their lawn. And when the consultants set out the criteria, they separated multi-apartment buildings from single-family homes. And so multi-unit apartment buildings are charged a flat rate for all the water they use, without regard to how much or how little. But a single family has the 4 tiers, without regard to how many people live in the home. So if you had a multi-generational family living in a home, of course they're going to use more water, but per user they could actually be really good at conserving water.
So the bottom line is how much water is being used in what kind of a building?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so a commercial building, which now includes multi-unit apartments, gets charged a flat rate for all of their use, and a single family or even duplexes, I guess, are charged the tiered rates. And to me, it seems like an arbitrary classification. If you look at industrial uses especially, they have similar factors in use, that they could do a lot to conserve. And yet we didn't address that because we were just interested in this dichotomy between multi-unit buildings and single-family unit dwellings. And so it seems arbitrary.
But when you hire someone to come in who specializes in looking at this, were you looking, what was the bottom line you were looking for? Was it being able to pay and have enough income coming in to deal with the water treatment, or was it just trying to be fair, or what?
So initially, one of our big interests was in trying to make sure that low-income renters could afford our water fees. But it's illegal to charge somebody a different rate for water based on their income level, and that was made clear early on. Nonetheless, this moved forward with the idea that some renters are low income. Well, I have to tell you that some homeowners, are on fixed incomes when they're in their retirement years, or just
and we
generally.
have a large population of retired people.
Yes. And so, shifting the burden from apartment buildings to homeowners doesn't necessarily help just low-income people. If you look at all the building that we're doing right now, it's really high-rent apartment buildings, and they're going to get the break that low-income renters get as well. At the same time that low-income homeowners are going to get the higher rates that all homeowners get without regard to their income. So it just seemed like an arbitrary classification to me. I'm unaware of any other town in Michigan that has shifted this burden in this fashion.
And what are you getting a response from the citizens as to what they think of this? Have they've been informed of what their water rates are?
So, moving back just a little bit first, for the 9 months that this study was going on, we really didn't notify city residents that we were considering this. It was just done, and then we're getting a reaction now. And people are mystified, as am I, about how we are classifying users. And so I believe that with the new council, we will probably revisit this subject. I've had talks with a couple of potential members of council who are talking about maybe changing it back to our original method, because this was revenue neutral. It doesn't get us any new money. It just shifts who's paying the money. Just restore the old rates, create a moratorium until we go through a study that uses more equitable classification of users.
So I'm assuming you didn't vote for these changes.
No, absolutely not. I voted against them. I understood them to be arbitrary and really unreasonable when it was first explained to me.
And is it possible the council could have done a better job in informing the citizens that they were looking into this and there would be changes in the rates, so it wouldn't be such a surprise?
Yes. Well, both the council members and city staff. I mean, you get a water bill 4 times a year. During the time that this study was going on, we could have just slipped some little postcard in that water bill and let you know that we were contemplating these radical changes, and yet we didn't do that kind of outreach. And in fact, even while we were discussing it at council, while some of us were telling our neighbors and announcing on nextdoor.com that this was coming, and you should express an opinion to your council member, still a lot of people didn't hear about it until after it was done.
So I'm sure you'll be hearing about it soon.
Well, because the greatest water use is in the summertime, and people are right now getting their water bill for their water use in the summer, and the change happened, I think, July 1st. I think we'll be hearing about it.
And with just a couple of minutes left, we haven't talked much about that large development that was taken over by McKinley to finish up, called the George that was on Packard, correct?
That's right.
And that was a tremendous construction project, but it has moved forward. So what state are we in now with? They're basically looking to rent units now?
Yep. So that project was originally called Packard Square, and the new developer has renamed it to the George. And the last update I got was more than a month ago, and it was my understanding from the developer that they were renting units and that they were seeking the certificate of occupancy. Nobody can move in until the city gives final approval. And I haven't heard an update since then, so I'm imagining that they have not yet gotten that certificate because people would be living there. But we're on the verge of having people move in, and I think that McKinley has done a good job of taking up this project after it failed with the original developer and moving forward. So I'm happy that it won't be under construction anymore, even though it's not the kind of development that I would have plopped down in the middle of a residential block.
Mm-hmm. And in the minute we have left, I know you're on the Energy Commission. Do you want to just say a few things about that, what the commission is doing?
Well, the city has hired a new sustainability director, and I believe that we're going to be more proactive about addressing our climate action plan. We've had plans and we express intentions all the time, but implementing those intentions hasn't been our strength. And so I'm really looking forward to this next year or two where we're going to start actually implementing aspects of that. It's important that we as a city government provide the example. And even though the city as an energy consumer only consumes 2% of the energy of everybody in Ann Arbor, we can still present that example. We should be installing solar panels on our parking structures. We should be insulating our buildings and retrofitting them to be more efficient and using more efficient vehicles and such.
Okay, so that's a topic that we'll continue to look at over the next year because it sounds like there's a lot that can still happen.
There is a lot, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
It's always fun to come.
Remember to join us for a new episode every third Wednesday of the month. We want to hear from you, so please email us at ctn@a2gov.org. Attention, Ward Talk. You can also follow CTN and ask questions on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. We'll make sure to include your questions. For Ward Talk, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz. Until next month.